So let's get to our design time. We'll spend maybe another 20, 30 minutes on it, and then we'll wrap it up, hopefully. But this kind of goes back to what we were talking about in the Telltale section, and kind of something that I've been experiencing with playing Batman Arkham Knight. And that's the problem with going too much or doing too many things at once, whether it is as a studio or from a design point of view. Now, we mentioned, of course, Telltale with having so many, I guess, pots on the stove there with all their different games. But we've also seen this before in many independent developers who, again, they try to do so much, or they're trying to just keep experimenting without putting out a successful project. Now, my example with Batman Arkham Knight is that I love the first two games by Rocksteady, but the third one just is not working for me, and a lot of that has to do with them fully integrating the Batmobile as a major part of the game, and it pretty much takes over everything to the point of almost overriding what made the last two games work. And it's always hard as a developer when it comes to developing a franchise or a studio in terms of how far do you go out of the box versus what you know what you can do. So I want to get your thoughts on this, Rob, again with your background with game producing. Like, how do you I guess keep those two minds happy?
It's difficult, and I know we run into the same thing with the NBA 2K franchise. Now, for that, it's very different. You know, you have basketball, and basketball is the rules don't change that much, and so when you get the part of the game right, well, you got to expand, and that's what all sports franchises have done. Madden, FIFA, all that stuff. You've expanded into a variety of different things. So, but that has happened over decades. So it's not like they did it all at once. Now with a Batman type thing, it's not like you're taking the original and just building a little bit upon that. No, because gamers won't appreciate that. You have to kind of change the experience as much as humanly possible without changing the experience completely, right? You want to keep all those same elements, like you say. So when you do take the time out of change, like getting all those art assets, adding the new features that take way longer than it appears, you know, at first glance. And the level design and all that stuff that comes with a Batman game as they expand them bigger and bigger, and then throw in a massive mechanic change. That is a difficult thing to do, to say the least, you know, especially in balance and testing and all that stuff. And then you got to sell it to the fans. So it could be really cool in-house, and a lot of people, it makes everyone excited to work on something new. But like we said before, sometimes you got to, cut the line. And so from your perspective, is the only one I can go through. It just seems like it was one of those things that maybe didn't work out, at least as far as you're concerned. But it's a problem that you wrestle with, because it does get dull after a while. You know, you're working on the exact same thing every year, and you've been in the business for so many years, and you want to put in something new, put your own spin on it. And you roll the dice every time. Sometimes it really works out and you knock it out of the park. Sometimes it's just okay, whatever. And then sometimes it kind of reduces the experience you were hoping to have.
Yeah. And as we've said, like when it comes to a lot of independent developers, it's very hard to know, what is your bread and butter. We mentioned, of course, in our last section about Telltale. When they got their big hit, they just went all in, too much of their detriment in terms of their overall design. But we see many independent developers do radically different things with each one of their projects. Two examples that we talked about before, Kit Fox Games and Clay Entertainment. Each one of their games has been a completely different design, completely different sense of progression, and it's very hard, I think, sometimes to know, like, what is your market? Like, when we look at most traditional developers, a developer who makes first-person shooters like id, they know what people come to id Software for. It's not, 3D platforming. Just like with Nintendo, they know why people play a Mario platformer or they play Smash Brothers. And it's very tricky to try and grow things out while retaining your existing fan base.
Yeah, and I feel like Mario did fall into a lot of the expanding of that IP. That it's weird how Mario got away with a lot of it. Dr. Mario, that wasn't anything like a platformer. And even, in Paper Mario, it was it had the same look and feel of maybe a platform, but it was the RPG element that was probably foreign to a lot of platform players. So it was weird how they got away with it. I mean, I love the Paper Mario game. It wasn't as strong of an RPG as I would have liked, but at the same time, it was a nice marriage, and I appreciated it.
Hmm.
But they managed to get away with it with that property. But when you take a property that isn't a video game first, and you could also argue that Mario did not appear first in Mario Brothers, which he obviously didn't. Well, and there's a difference between Mario Brothers and Super Mario Brothers, and then you got your Donkey Kong and Mario Golf and or in golf and all that stuff. But like when you have a property that's been around for decades and decades, Batman, and it's undergone so many iterations and so many different generations of people know it in a completely different way. Whether you've got the original, just the comics, and then there's the original series, the serial, and then there's the Batman show with Adam West that I grew up watching.
Hmm.
Not live, of course, it was before my time, but I watched reruns, and it was just a great sense of humor. And then you got the Tim Burton Batman, and then the comics expanded over time and got darker, and you got Dark Knight, of course, and then the more recent series, or sorry, not the more recent series, but the Christian Bale Batman, and now the Ben Affleck Batman.
Which I think is already done from what they're saying.
Exactly. That was done before it started.
Hmm.
But you have all these iterations going on in the public eye, and then you got the video game that has to. They got the, of course, animation series as well. But when you take it to a video game, you're trying to do a lot of different things. Like the story is hard to keep up with because you can't really make your own new story. You have to base it off of existing stories and comics. But you can choose movie franchise or comics or the animation franchise. And I feel like they went with the latter, which is a good choice. The older video games that were based off Batman were based off the movies, and it's hard to keep up where the movies change that often.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I went off the rails a little bit. So steer us back, Josh.
As another interesting point, I've been hearing complaints about the new Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and a lot of people have been complaining about that being like very dull. It doesn't feel like it's doing anything, and that's the other side of the coin. That when you have a franchise of 2, 4, 6 different games in there, how do you keep things going without just retreading the same water? I mean, how many times can Lara Croft become a Tomb Raider, as they keep saying with each one of those games? She'll be a Tomb Raider this time. Oh no, wait, now she'll be the Tomb Raider. And it's again like that very challenging push and pull between elevation and iteration. Like you can take what you've had and make it better, or you can try and do something brand new and try and grow things. And that was one of the things about Batman. When you look at, I know a lot of people, including myself, loved Arkham Asylum. The game was very self-contained, it did what it had to do, and it just felt like a really great experience. Starting from the second was when we got that beginning of that blowing up. It was no longer this little experience, it was this open world adventure. And then the third game goes even further than that. And we can argue that yes, they did not run into the issue of not iterating or elevating those games. But when it comes at the cost of what drew people to the franchise and to the gameplay to begin with, it begins to take its toll, I think.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to think of how to expand the game in a significant way every year. I mean, you start to reach the point of diminishing returns, and maybe that's why you introduce this new mechanic of the Batmobile. It's just hard to say like what it is. It really is balancing that thing of too much iteration versus too little. Because too little, we talked about that in the last segment. Too much is this segment, and it's such a weird balance to take. The decisions that have to be made, and then the amount of follow through that comes with those decisions is disgustingly big. The cost, like the man hours and the actual money that goes into this, and the art, and all of this cost. And what are you going to do? Throw it away? I mean, yes, this is the right answer, but like, you don't always know what the fan wants or what the fan's going to react to, and that's why games fail or succeed. No one knows.
Yeah.
It could be perfect and just it doesn't resonate. So,
And I think it goes back to that old adage of you don't fix what wasn't broken to begin with. And
Right.
that's always been that issue. I think that's one of the things I found with Arkham Knight, that a lot of the stealth and general gameplay didn't feel as polished and as interesting as I felt in Arkham City. That's definitely a discussion for its own video, but it runs into that case of if the experience is getting worse while you're trying to grow things up, then you're just creating a very unstable foundation. And I think a good analog that would be kind of like what we saw with Call of Duty, and how every year there's another iteration. They're trying to, push it a little bit in this direction. Maybe they'll push it a little bit in that direction next year. But it gets to that point of, at what is the core experience of Call of Duty, and are you portraying that with your changes and your additions?
Yeah, and there's also the question of, do you need to make another one?
Yeah,
I
that's.
mean, and go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say that's always been that big challenge, because the publisher, yes, they want you to have 5, 10, 15 different games, but if your mechanics and your systems can only sustain maybe 1 or 2 games, what are you going to do with those other 5 different games in your series?
Yeah, sometimes you just got to take that time to reboot the whole thing and do a new engine and all that stuff. Sometimes it's just worth it. Actually, Gordo, could you any articles on that? The Shadow of the Tomb Raider is too white. Could you post that in the Discord? I'd be interested in reading some of that.
And getting back to Batman, I know there's been rumors that Rocksteady may be working on a Superman game or a Flash game. I forget what was the superhero game that they've been rumored to be moving on to. Because again, with Arkham Knight, this was they're saying their definitive last game in this franchise. And it's very tricky, I think. And this was the point that I was thinking of. This is, I think, the big difference. We've talked about this before when it comes to independent developers. Many independent studios, they will make one game and then that's it. Like, again, with something like, trying to think of a really good example off the top of my head. Like, you need something like, there's just too many damn games there. Yeah, Fez could be one too. But for many developers, they put everything they had into this game, and then it's like, I don't ever want to work on this game again. I want to make something original. And we see from a lot of independent studios that their portfolio is just a mishmash of different genres and game designs. And they become more associated to the studio rather than to an individual game. And that can sometimes come back to bite them. If you, again, this goes back to our last section, and even earlier in this one, that what happens if you bank on this experimental, never before seen game, and it fails? And that was your project the last 2 to 3 years.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is always the tough thing to try, because it's very costly, and we had touched on that earlier. That's a way to get rid of a lot of money really quickly. It is very costly. It's very dangerous and risky because you might not even come out with it. It might fail miserably. Because at a certain point, your studio becomes trusted. Like if Bethesda comes out with a random like racing game, I think people will buy it just because it's Bethesda.
Oh yeah.
But it could just fail hard and put them out of business. So it's like, you just do it at your own risk. Little gnat. Okay, sorry. You do it at your own risk and hope for the best, I guess.
And we said this before, I'm sure you can agree with this as well, that there are ways to mitigate that risk with proper play testing and doing things in the early stages before you fully commit to a project. But even at the end of the day, though, it can be like, even if all your playtesters testers say they love your game, you still don't know what's going to happen when your game is released, to all the thousands or millions of people who play on Steam or PS4 or Switch or whatever.
Yeah, and playtesters are still a tough one because, like, if you have internal QA, I mean, they're used to the same old game, just like you are in terms of making it. So they're good. They want to see something fresh, and it's tough because you do not know. Even if you do some study and throw some people in front of it, the problem is they didn't pay for it. Like I've had so many people that I show a game to, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I totally spent $10 on that," and then they don't do it.
Exactly, and it's why it's so important to be able to keep your costs low, and again to understand, you know, I think it's that phrase, finding the fun, that you really need to figure out what your game is and find it as early and as quickly as possible. Because you don't want to be making those design changes halfway to 75% through your title, because
Hmm.
that is just a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, yeah, it is. But yeah, kudos to all the companies that manage to do it and do it well.
Hmm.
Most of those companies actually just become production or publishers because that's the best way of doing it. You buy the other game instead of making it
Hmm.
yourself.
Yeah. And I know that's what Cliff Harris has done with Positech. They've published, the games from like J. Brigade. They did a big pharma a few years ago, and he's still making his own games with production line. Because it really becomes like if you're successful enough in the game industry, you can pretty much do publishing because you already know how it's all done at that point.
Yeah, Team 17 did that as well. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, they were just worms forever, and then all of a sudden they come out with this different game. I'm like, what? That's weird. And then I realized they just became a publisher. They're
Mm-hmm.
publishing someone else's game.
Yeah. And another big example that we haven't mentioned yet when it comes to this going too big or not knowing what your focus is, the Trine franchise is a really good example of that. Did you ever play Trine?
Yeah, a little bit. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Long time ago.
Yeah.
Sheesh.
A lot of people did not like Trine 3. They felt that there was less content in it. They didn't like the jump to 3D. And it almost bankrupted the studio there. Because again, when you put all your hopes and dreams on one game and it fails, what's your backup?
I feel like the greatest success, talking about going back to the whole Batman,
Mm-hmm.
doing too much, the greatest success that I can think of in the history of games that did this was Grand Theft Auto 3.
Mm-hmm.
They took their top-down 2D game and made it into this full open world 3D, craziness. That paid dividends for them.
Oh, yes, it did. And again, like, it could have gone the other way, too. It could have failed spectacularly, and that Rockstar would have gone out very quickly.
Yeah, I don't know how well the first two did, but certainly I hadn't heard of them until after the third one.
I think a lot of people are the same there.
Yeah.
And going back to what you were saying earlier regarding Nintendo, Nintendo is another one of those studios. Even Nintendo and Blizzard are kind of like that odd man out. That it doesn't matter what they're working on, people are going to buy it. Again, if tomorrow Blizzard announced they're making a cooking simulator, they're still going to get a good like 2 to 3 million pre-orders from fans.
Yeah.
And that's always been, I think, the dream for a lot of studios to get to that point where your fans will support you no matter what you do. You are the brand, not your game.
Yeah.
And it's always hard to get to that level, especially when you are a major studio. As we said before, major studios can't pivot that easily compared to a smaller one.
Yeah, they can't pivot, but at the same time, they're probably less likely to fail. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. They're less likely to fail just because of the money they have. But again, too much money spent on a failed project could bring down just about anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly not Blizzard, or Nintendo for that matter, but it
Mm-hmm.
could. Other companies.
Yeah. And as another example of like knowing like what to do or where to go, we of course talk about Mojang with Minecraft. Minecraft, of course, has earned a little bit of money. I think we can all agree on that.
A little bit, I think.
But their second project, Scrolls, was just an absolute failure. I think it's already been shut down.
Huh.
And again, it goes back to what we were saying in our last section that from the outside, you look at these companies that do succeed, your Telltales, your Nintendos, and so on and so forth, and you think, how can they not be, swimming in money? Everyone's heard of them. But as you just said there, Rob, enough failed projects will sink anything. And I'm sure Mojang is not going out of business. I think
No.
Minecraft has earned them enough. But again, there will come a point, like, eventually everybody who has played or who's going to play Minecraft will. And their profits are going to go down. And then it comes down to, what do you do next?
Yeah. Yeah. What do you do next? What do you do when all of the copycats of Minecraft have taken over the world? Yeah, it's tough. Like I mentioned earlier, Zynga,
Hmm.
they fell into that. They had their, they got everyone addicted to these games, and
Hmm.
the original, like, I don't want to say the original loot boxers, but basically, the original people who got people addicted to buying useless things in games,
Hmm.
and spending all their time in tasks that just stimulate parts of the brain.
Hmm.
But then they tried to pivot a little bit, and now, like, you don't know. Like, they have so much ill will in the video games business, and they've lost all recognizability in the casual games
Hmm.
business.
And
So,
King is now kind of like taking over that mantle from Zynga in a way.
well, King's done very well, but there's a lot of companies out there. Like, oh boy, I really
Uh,
can't. Been so out of it for so long. But you look at the top sales for
hmm.
iPhone and that kind of thing, and you get the top players very quickly.
Rovio.
Rovio, yeah. God, who's did? Okay, I can't look it up right now. Sorry.
But as we are saying, when it comes to these companies, it's very hard when you're trying to keep these things going for multiple projects.
Actually, Rovio is a good example because they tried to pivot into movies and television.
Mm-hmm.
Oh God.
Yeah.
I don't know if those were failures, but they should have been.
I hope we don't see another Angry Birds movie. Let's
Yeah.
just hope that doesn't happen there.
Yeah.
But as we've said before, is the dream for your game to hit that point of just pure saturation that either it becomes, this mass marketed title, or it allows your company to do just basically carte blanche. You have enough money to do whatever you want.
Yeah.
But as we said before, it's becoming more and more clear that limitations are a major part of being able to make a successful project. Because as we've said, it's very easy to just sit there and just put every idea you can think of into a game. But does that make that game work?
Yeah. And even if you can afford any project, it's the smart publishers, the smart managers who really know not to go completely crazy and spend all their money because it can go very quickly, and then that's when you have
Mm-hmm.
to have closures and layoffs, and that's never fun for anybody.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I guess going back to like Arkham Knight and like that kind of design, like it's always that risk of being able to take this and go from there. Because as we've said, like it could have been like they could have originally thought, let's just keep the same basic gameplay. Maybe we'll just throw in a different environment, and that will be our next Arkham game. But they kept trying, they kept growing things out, and there is definitely good in that of wanting to do things bigger. But I guess here's my question for you, Robin. Here's the question for the chat as well. Like, when do you feel enough is enough in terms of trying to grow a franchise or grow a design out?
It's hard to say. I mean, there's some franchises that if they came out with another game tomorrow, I'd happily buy it. But most of those franchises are very slow to come out with anything. Uh, in terms of the enough is enough, it is so difficult to say. I think the thing you have to keep in the back of your head if you are a company that's looking to do some crazy innovation or a new game or whatever, and it just clicked when I said it earlier, is like keep in mind the fact that if you fail, you're going to have to fire people.
Mm-hmm.
Keep in mind that if you try to innovate too hard, if you're a designer or if you're a producer, it's like keep in mind that if this fails, it's going to impact people's lives
Mm-hmm.
at your company. So just know that that's the risk. The risk isn't that, oh well, we might fail. The risk is, no, a failure means that people lose their jobs. So just remember that. And if you're at a big company and you have that opportunity, well, maybe just kind of, if you want to go do something crazy, go do it on your own. But don't do that. Don't put that giant risk in place that's
Mm-hmm.
going to kill people, kill jobs. At the same time, don't keep yourself so milk toasty
Mm-hmm.
that you don't innovate, because that can also have the same effect. Like,
Mm-hmm.
no, like, start to learn when you should do it, when enough is enough, and there's no secret formula, but
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of common sense that goes into it.
Yep. And when it comes to working on a sequel to a game, I guess from what you've done with 2K or even with some of your other projects, like when you think about like trying to develop a franchise or going from one game to the next, like how do you approach saying like where do we go with this design after we've already had a success, or in some cases we've seen developers take a game that was just okay or maybe even just a little bit bad and say, what do we do with this now?
Yeah, and I feel like the sports and like sports games is a good place to look there because they're forced to iterate every single year, mostly due to expectation and then changing in rosters and rules and all that kind of stuff. They're forced to iterate all the time, and so you'll have failures as part of your game and successes. But the thing that they do is that they compartmentalize. So there's the main part of their game. They're not going to suddenly make NBA 2K or NBA Live or Madden into like NBA Jam or NFL Blitz. Like they're not going to do that. They're going to keep the core game the same, and they might push towards other areas. Like I know NBA 2K is, and a lot of them are kind of pushing into the MMO, like the career. You're your own guy and you're trying to make it. But at the core of it, it's all the same. And if you want to play a basketball game, well, you buy one of those, you're gonna get a basketball game. You want to buy a football game, you're gonna buy Madden. It's gonna be a football game. And if you follow it every year and you buy it every year, well, you're gonna see all the bad. But at its core, it's not gonna change, and it's gonna meet expectations. If you change that base part, like if you decide to take Batman on a summer vacation to Rio, then suddenly weird things are going to happen and people aren't going to care anymore. But just keep the core, and if you want to experiment, just do so in little pockets, you know?
Yep, and like that kind of like experimenting, we can see that in the evolution of something like the Dark Souls series and what they're doing with Shadows Die Twice. That they're still keeping to their respective the genre that they like, but they're doing those little pushes in and out into different areas. Again, the whole thing between Dark Souls and Bloodborne being a really good example of two different flavors on the same element to it.
Yeah.
But again, like I think From Software has reached that point of they know what their audience likes, and it's just a matter of fitting everything around that. But then once they've done that, they can do whatever the hell they want.
Yeah. Yeah, as long as you keep the core the same, you can do whatever you want, and over time, because even a failure at that point is still making money. And every once in a while, you'll have that magic you hit that makes it the best one of the series, and that's what you always strive for, is trying to just better yourself from last year, without kind of pissing off your base.
Yeah. And I think that was the thing. Like we've said this before about Dark Souls 2. It may be considered like the worst of the Dark Souls games, but it's still one of the best games all around, just compared to everything else.
Yeah, yeah, you're doing something right if people who hate your game still buy it.
Yes. Let me see. Are there any other points before we begin to wrap things up? Oh, here's my last point for you in the audience, and then I'll throw it over to you if there's anything else. But I want to go back to the independent developers for a second again about being able to do anything. And I just want to ask you, like, what do you think about that in terms of like a studio branding or as a game design planning of being able to just say, okay, our first game is going to be a real-time strategy game, our next game is going to be a dating sim, our next game is going to be an ARPG, and just have that complete freedom of just anything within your scope you can do.
And I do know someone very specific who does this. Is the guy who did Zavix Tower. He's done 4 games, or he's done 3 games and working on a 4th, and they're all different. And I find that to be very refreshing. I like that approach. I think that's cool. It's gutsy. It establishes you as someone who's got range, but you do lose out on a very specific fan base. So it is very risky to do that. But then again, on the other side of things, if you have that hit, where do you go from there?
Yeah.
because you with one hit you don't know what the magic was. If you have a series and the series is stable and the fans like it, you have an idea, you know.
Hmm.
But if you have the one thing that hit, you don't know what it was about that game that hit. You have no clue. And people who say they do, they don't.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you just don't. But if you're able to follow it up with a success, then you know. Then you can figure it out. You say, okay, well this thing works. I'm sticking to it. Um, but yeah, I think that is very cool. It's very it makes it fun for the developer. It could make it fun for the fans. Usually there has to be some kind of consistency between them, whether it be art or just a sense of humor or something like that, a style. You look at Final Fantasy, and every game is different, but every game is the same at the same time, and
Hmm.
um, it worked for them. But yeah, that's all I got to say. It's like it is hard. I don't know why. It's a tough call if you
Hmm.
really want to be successful and have staying power. But it's interesting. It's gutsy and it's unique. And if you're an agile developer, that is to say, if you're a solo or you have a small team and
Hmm.
you can pivot and do that and do it quickly and efficiently, then go for it. Sure.
Hmm. Yep, and like as a good two good examples of that, being able to make that transition and do something. The developer from I know the first one, Dead Cells, Motion Twins developer, they were known for making like little mobile games before they decided to go for this massive Metroidvania style roguelike, and it worked really well for them. And as another case, let me see, what was the name of that studio? It's probably not going to show up. Let's see. Here it is. Ogrehead, who did Asura. Like, they were, again, known for just making very small mobile games. They decided to go push to do something else. And I really enjoy it. I think that game is very underrated for a lot of people. But, again, it's that case of being able to have that freedom to really go out and do something. And then, if you like it and you start to get a lot of buzz about it, to then keep going and doing more of it. But as you just said there, Rob, I think this will be our big point to end on, that you never know why a game is a massive success. You can make guesses, you can say, oh, people really like the voice acting, or, this gameplay worked. But it's very hard when we have those games that just seem to pop out of nowhere to figure out what was that magic. Again, games like Minecraft, Five Nights, Undertale, and even so on and so forth, that yes, they are mega successes, but, and this actually goes back to what I said in the last section, what do you do after that major success? You can't just say, oh, we're going to make Undertale again, but maybe instead of black and white, it's white and black in terms of the background. And yes, you will, as you said, you will always have people who will buy the game just on the name recognition and the brand. But it starts to become, I think, a losing battle in a sense of trying to keep people entertained and still trying to kind of chase that magic that you originally had.
Yeah, it's tough.
So I think that's my final points, and I know we got to be at least, yeah, we're an hour and 40 in, so I think we'll wrap things up for this week. I guess, do you have any final things you want to add, Rob?
No, I mean I enjoyed coming back, and I'm glad you got your stuff sorted this week. And hopefully next week we'll both be as stable as possible, and just like today.
All right. Well, I think that will wrap things up. I'll be back later tonight for a game stream of what I don't know yet. But Rob, as always, it's great to have you on. And since you're now doing streaming again, if you want to plug that, feel free.
Sure. Hopefully, I'll be able to do it again next week. I was rusty yesterday. Hopefully, it'll be better next time. But I'm doing Titan Quest. It's twitch.tv/Indie Voyage Rob. So check it out. Come and join me.
And what's your like a schedule like time wise for streaming?
It's about the same starting time as us, maybe a little bit early, 11 a.m., maybe 11:30 a.m. Pacific, or noon possibly. Haven't quite settled, but yeah, that's about the time I go for a couple hours.
All right. Well, and for anyone watching us live or recorded right now, thank you so much for tuning in. If you'd like to get this entire talk ad-free and uncut, be sure to check out our Patreon, patreon.com/GWBicer, and VIP supporters will get those videos. But I'll be back later tonight, and be sure to check out or check back throughout the week for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. So until our next stream, have a great night, and we'll catch you all next Sunday for another chat.